In this episode, we discuss ways for flyers to improve their skills by doing things at home, and we also talk about how we can keep our flyers from bending their knees when they're in one-legged stunts. Hey guys, and welcome back to this episode of the podcast. We are answering more of your questions that you guys have submitted for our coaches, for our parents. A lot of the questions that we're answering in these episodes are submitted by your athletes. So if you have a cheer athlete that is a child of yours, or if you're a coach and have a team, definitely make sure that you're sharing these with them, because there may be questions that they have that they haven't asked yet that we can help to answer. So before we get started with today's episode and our questions for the day, I do want to remind everyone that we are still working towards building up our scholarship. The first one we're going to give away, our ultimate goal, our big goal, is to build enough of a following with our podcast that we can start to give away a scholarship a month. I know that's a big goal. It's probably a little bit down the road, but we are still working at building up to our first scholarship. And the ways you can help us to build or to support the podcast at anchor.fm/cheerleading. Then you can click the support this podcast tab with either a monthly contribution, or if you'd like a one-time donation, we can take that as well. Other ways that you can support the podcast to help us to grow this scholarship for athletes is to just share it. We actually have some really great sponsors that when we share our podcast, or the more views that we get, the bigger our work with those sponsors can grow to. So help us to share the podcast, even if you can't financially support with a monthly donation or a monthly support. Just by sharing, you're doing a huge service for our scholarship to help with our cheer athletes. So moving forward, the two questions we're going to talk about today. Awesome questions that it shows that our athletes are starting to think outside the box a bit. So our first question came from a flyer. She said, what are some things that I can work on at home to be a better flyer? Which I think is awesome, because it just shows that our athletes are looking to get better outside of just going to the gym, which shows that they're looking for different avenues, which is great. Now, the obvious first thing that you'll hear a lot of people say is, well, stretch. In my opinion, cheerleaders are too flexible in certain areas. And so adding more stretching and more flexibility on top of all that is somewhat of a recipe for disaster. So the first thing I would say to focus on is strength. And we look at that through a few different ways. So most of the stunts that our flyers do are on one leg. So an easy thing you can do is spend more time on one leg. If you have things that you're doing around the house, like brushing your teeth in the morning and at night before you go to bed, stand on one leg while you brush your teeth. Now, we're supposed to brush our teeth for 2 minutes. So imagine if you're brushing your teeth twice a day, you can do 2 1-minute single leg balances each day. And that extra stimulus of being on one foot is going to help you to be more comfortable standing on one leg. Plus the fact that you're doing things while you're standing on one leg is going to, again, build up stability a whole lot faster. Additionally, you can do things like chair dips, right? So you get a chair from the dining room or somewhere that you can put your hands on, and you work on some dips to build upper body strength. Additionally, you can also work on core strength. This is a huge thing, right? We are going to improve tumbling. We're going to improve stunting. Overall athletic performance is improved when we work on core strength. So coming up with, a short core exercise routine that you can do with some plank work, some V-ups, some Supermans, working on strengthening the lower back. These can all help to bring an increase in your core strength, and it's easy stuff you can do at home. You can do it in the backyard. You can do it in your bedroom. You can do it, in the living room. It doesn't take much room, and it doesn't have to take a whole lot of equipment. A lot of the stuff that we do is all gymnastics based, right? So it's body weight movements that we, create the foundation for most of the activities that we do. So if we can incorporate some of these things into our home routines, that alone can help us to be a better athlete. Other things we can do outside of just physical things to be a better flyer. Visualize the stunts that you're working on. Visualize the things that you may be struggling with when you're in the gym. That can include stunts, that can include tumbling, that can include jumps, your dance, right? If you have a section of the dance that you struggle with. when you visualize and create that picture in your mind of the skills you're trying to do, it helps your brain to process, put everything together, can actually help you to perform better. So visualizing, going through your routines in 8 counts, going through individual stunts, step by step, jumps, tumbling, etc., can be hugely beneficial. If you have game film or film of yourself doing things, watch that film, nitpick yourself, go through all the things that you know you're doing wrong and address them mentally, right? So you think through them and you're kind of coaching yourself. See what you can find on your own video that you know is incorrect or things that you can improve on. And then lastly, kind of detached from all of that, is to be a better athlete in general, not just flying, but for our flyers, nutrition. Make sure that you're focusing on getting the right amounts of food in, good quality foods, quality proteins, carbohydrates, and fat, healthy fats, right? So good fats for the body. Fats are good. They're not a bad thing. But just outside of working specifically on things, having a good nutritional foundation is paramount to being a better flyer, a better cheer athlete in general. So a couple of things to work on. Again, single leg balance, arm strength, core strength for sure, visualization, so watching yourself in your head go through some of these skills, and additionally, making sure that your nutrition is on point, making sure that you're eating the right amount of foods. Now, that is a perfect segue into our second question, which actually is, how do I stop my knee from caving in when I'm flying? So going back to our first point that we had, which was, what can we work on at home? The first thing we mentioned was being more comfortable on a single leg balance, right? So the reason that most athletes or most flyers have a bent knee when they're on one leg is not because of a flexibility issue, and it has nothing to do with strength of the leg. What it mostly has to deal with is weakness in the muscles that support the hip or the muscles in the glutes. So when we stand on one leg, to keep ourselves from falling over, we have to use the glute muscles on the leg that's still down, or our down leg, our right leg, if we're flying traditional, right? So not funky foot. So if the hip muscles, the glutes, are weak, instead of the hips being parallel to the floor or being able to hold them even, what happens is our flyers stack their bodies over that right leg. And you can see this thing called a hip hike, which is when they pull their lib. You'll notice that they're kind of hiking their left hip over towards the right, and then they're leaning their body back towards the left to create the appearance of being balanced. The reason they're doing that is when they lean that weight over, hike that hip, they're stacking their body weight on top of their leg. And so that stacking on basically the bony structure of their body takes away the necessity of the muscles to hold them in place. So if you see an athlete that is constantly bending the knee, or they're kind of caving in, what's happening is, once they stack those bones and kind of lean their weight over to that right side, now the bones are maintaining their stunt. So if they shift it all, their knee's going to bend and they're going to lose the support because they unlocked the joint. So in order to improve the single leg being straight, the down leg, we have to focus outside of that. You have to put the focus into the hips and the glutes. And the ways we can do that, we have videos that we've posted through our YouTube and Instagram of things like monster walks, where we put a band around the knees or the ankles and we work side to side walking. We can also do step-up drills, stepping onto a bleacher or onto a tumble track or a set of folded panel mats. Again, putting the right foot onto, or whichever leg you're trying to work on keeping straight, put that foot onto the higher surface, step up, hold that either in a liberty, in a stretch, etc. And coaches have to watch the hips to make sure that they're not hiking. If they see that an athlete is hiking, then we have to coach that athlete to balance the hips back to parallel with the floor, and then there hold that position. If an athlete is struggling and we have to regress it all the way back, we can literally just have them stand on a panel mat with their down leg on the mat and the opposite leg off the mat, but even with the other foot. So it's as if they're standing on flat ground, but only one foot is supporting the entire body. And even in that position, we can see athletes will at times start to hip hike, and we'd want to force them to balance back out. So it's as if they're standing on a flat ground just like we would normally, except for one foot's on the mat or on the elevated surface, and the other one's just free hanging right next to it, not lower, not higher, right next to it. And by working on these glute muscles, these glute medius muscles, these single leg balance muscles, and giving our athletes more stimulus, we can improve with their ability to keep their legs straight. Now, additionally, once they get comfortable with that single leg balance, or they get comfortable keeping their hips even, now we can add some challenging things to it. We can put them on, like things like a BOSU or a balance board, something where they have to, there's some different stimulus, like a wobbly surface or things like that, because then that's going to help us to build ankle stability as well, and we'll take the glute strength and the hip stability up another notch. And so if we can continue to, we have, first of all, we have to create the proper movement, the proper position, and then from there we can strengthen and improve. The problem is most athletes will have these imbalances where they'll be hip hiking or their hips will be uneven. And instead of addressing that, we let it go, and that athlete's building strength improperly and they're using bad form. And that creates a whole lot more imbalances that kind of build on themselves. So what happens is we end up with an athlete that's severely imbalanced, poor movement patterns, and it's a whole lot harder to correct as they get older because they're stuck in their ways. That muscle memory is set in. So if you are having flyers that are struggling to keep that leg straight, the most important thing we can do is start to address it as quickly as possible, correct the form, and then build from that point up. Great questions this week. Thank you guys so much for joining on this episode. Keep your questions coming. Again, if you'd like to support the podcast, check out anchor.fm/cheerleading. Share this with your athletes if you're a coach or a parent. If you are an athlete, share this with your teammates and share it with your coaches as well. It's amazing how many coaches I get message us to tell us that their athletes have listened to the podcast and shared it with them. Really cool experience. So thank you guys again so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next episode.